Hi, welcome back to La Belle Vie, the Good Life Network, and our long crime content. Today we're going to revisit the Sarah Boone case, and specifically, I'm going to briefly go over the arrest affidavit and the information, which is the charging document for second-degree murder. Great, so let's first go over the arrest affidavit. And I'm going to read some of it because to the extent you haven't seen some of the videos, a lot of what's in that video, what are in those videos is in the arrest affidavit. I also think it's good for us to remember exactly this is the written compilation of what was ultimately allowed the judge to charge or allowed the prosecution to move forward and charge Ms. Boone with a second-degree murder. So there's a lot of information in here. So I think it's really good for us to go back over that. So here, this is just the first page. Let me see if I can get this a little bigger here. Here we go. Okay, so let me see. This is not very large. Okay, so on February 24th at 13:01 hours at 1 o'clock, Orange County deputies responded to her address in reference to a female reporting that her boyfriend, George Torres Jr., was deceased. The caller, later identified as Sarah Boone, reported playing a game of hide and seek. Sarah and George jokingly thought it would be funny if George got in the suitcase located in the living room. Sarah zipped George in the suitcase. Sarah mentioned that she and George had been consuming alcohol during the night and she went upstairs and passed out in her bed. She later woke up to her cell phone ringing multiple times around 1100 hours. She went downstairs and did not see George anywhere in the apartment. She then realized that he was possibly still inside the suitcase. Sarah unzipped the suitcase and found George unresponsive and not breathing. Shortly after the 911 call, deputies arrived on scene. Orange County Fire Department confirmed that George was in fact deceased at 13:07 hours. The decedent was found lying near the front door of the residence near a blue suitcase. So there that tells us near a blue suitcase. So it does sound like George was removed from the suitcase. A small laceration was evident on the decedent's lip and what appeared to be some bruising around his eye. So I thought that was interesting that they could tell that just from looking at, this is just the Orange County deputies responding. They can already see that. This isn't even the medical examiner here. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, where am I? Okay, interview Sarah Boone. On February 24th, 2020 at 16:57 hours, so 4:57, Detective Scott Lowen and I conducted an audio recorded interview with Sarah Boone located in my unmarked agency vehicle outside of her residence. The following is a synopsis of Sarah Boone's sworn recorded statement. Okay, first, this is important. I read verbatim to Sarah her constitutional Miranda warnings. It's important to put in there. Sarah agreed she understood that I had just read to her. Okay, that's good. So we've got her confirmation she's been read her rights. On February 23, 2020, at approximately 1600 hours, which is 4 o'clock, Sarah was located at her residence along with her boyfriend, George Torres, who also resides at the apartment. Only Sarah and George were located at the residence. Sarah's son, Lucas Boone, who would sometimes be at her residence when it was her days per the custody agreement, was with her ex-husband. Sarah said her and George were painting pictures and completing a puzzle while sharing a bottle of Woodbridge Chardonnay wine. It's interesting that she gave the specific type, because as we learn later, they found more than one bottle in the house with Publix receipts. As the evening went on, Sarah said her and George decided to play a game called hide and seek. Sarah hid upstairs in her shower first and said George never came to look for her. After a while, she decided to go downstairs where she found George. Sarah and George both thought it would be funny if she zipped George in the blue suitcase that was located downstairs in the living room area that had a few miscellaneous items that they had both planned to donate. Now remember, this is a recitation of Sarah's side of the story. George willingly got into the suitcase and Sarah zipped the suitcase up, but 2 of George's fingers were able to stick out the suitcase. Sarah and George were both laughing that she zipped him into the suitcase. Sarah explained the attached handle that made it easier to zip the suitcase was broken, but a paper clip was in the zipper and she was able to zip the suitcase up. On February 24, 2020, at approximately 30 hours, so 12:30, Sarah decided she was going to go upstairs while George was still located in the suitcase, thinking he could get himself out. Sarah laid down in her bed and fell asleep approximately 20 to 30 minutes after going upstairs. Sarah assumed George was going to get out of the suitcase and come to bed as well. Sarah said neither her nor George were drunk from the wine. As I'll mention, intoxication is not a defense to an element of a crime in Florida. Sarah woke up in the morning and heard her cell phone ringing multiple times but ignored the calls. Sarah said her cell phone, then she tells us that she knows it's her husband calling about her son, but then she's ignoring the calls. But anyway, Sarah said her cell phone was left downstairs from the night prior. Sarah knew her ex-boyfriend Brian Boone was calling, or ex-husband, excuse me. Sarah knew her ex-husband Brian Boone was calling because he was the only person who called her repeatedly to see if she was getting their son, Lucas Boone, from school. Sarah said she stayed upstairs for a while and assumed George was downstairs on the laptop looking for employment. This is interesting. Sarah said she went downstairs at approximately 1100 hours and realized she could not find George anywhere in the apartment. Now, the reason that's interesting is because, so she's saying she went downstairs at 1100 hours, so 11 o'clock. But then we know from the videos that when she finally calls Brian and says, get over here, I believe that was like 12:45, 12:50, because I know that during the interrogations with the police with Brian Boone, they were talking a lot about because apparently Sarah called him back when he was still on the way. So it's just interesting that if she was downstairs at 11 o'clock and didn't call Brian until 12:30, 12:45-ish, what was she doing for an hour and a half? Oh. Okay, so she realized she couldn't find him. She freaked out. Sarah freaked out and remembered the last time she saw George was when she zipped him in the suitcase. Sarah unzipped the suitcase and found George unresponsive. Sarah called Brian back, told him George was dead. See, this is where I thought that phone call happened at like 12:45-ish. Sarah called Brian back, told him George was dead, and begged him to come to her residence. Brian only resides a few minutes away. When Brian got to the residence, he walked into the apartment, saw George unresponsive on the floor, and told Sarah she needed to call 911. Brian then immediately walked outside and stayed there until law enforcement arrived while Sarah followed the instructions from the 911 operator. Sarah Boone's iPhone XS. Now, this is interesting. We know that they had the phone, right? But we didn't really quite know some of the details. So this gives us a little bit of that. So Sarah's iPhone XS. On February 24th, Sarah gave me verbal and written consent by signing a waiver and affidavit form for the Orange County Sheriff's Office to search her iPhone XS, and then it gives the serial number. This is what I thought was interesting. Digital forensic investigator Junella Udon responded to the scene and began to download the cell phone. So that was something I wasn't aware of or hadn't heard, was that they were downloading the cell phone on the scene. So I'm wondering if they downloaded the cell phone and then gave the phone back to Sarah so she could have it. But we know they also took the laptop and the police had the laptop with them when Sarah came to the police department the next day. But I'm wondering if they downloaded the cell phone and then gave the cell phone back to her. I don't think that really matters, but I just thought that was a little interesting piece of detail I hadn't seen before. Okay. So while the cell phone was being downloaded, this is what I thought was interesting. Like, did they know about these videos when they were still there that day? The day when they came and found him deceased, that Monday. So while the cell phone was being downloaded, 2 videos were found on the cell phone. The first video began recording on February 24th, 2020 at 23:12 hours, so 11:12. George repeatedly yelling out Sarah's name. Sarah told George, "For everything you've done to me, F you, Sarah was laughing when she said F you. Stupid. Of course, she actually said the swear word, but I'm not going to say that here. George repeatedly kept calling out Sarah's name. George said, I can't effing breathe. Seriously. Sarah replied, yeah, that's what you do when you choke me. George continued to repeat himself, telling Sarah he could not breathe. Sarah replied, yeah, that's on you. Oh, that's what I feel like when you cheat on me. Sarah said, you should probably shut the F up. In this video, the suitcase was facing downward, and you can see George pushing on the suitcase in an attempt to get out. The video is 2 minutes and 3 seconds long. The second video began recording on 24/20/20 hours, so at 11:20. So the first video started at 11:12. It was for, what did they say? They gave the time of how long? Oh, yeah, 2 minutes and 3 seconds. So 11, 12, 13, 14, and then from that point, 11:14ish to then she starts filming again at 11:20. George yelled out Sarah's name. The suitcase was now in a different position, facing upwards. And this is, I think, where the police are going to insinuate, the prosecution can insinuate she like flipped him over and was, like torturing him or taunting him. I don't know. Anyway, who knows? The suitcase was now in a different position facing upwards, or maybe he was moving it around trying to get out. The suitcase was now in a different position facing upwards and moved over towards the left side of the living room. The video was 22 seconds long. Okay. Now we've got the synopsis of the autopsy. And again, these are just summaries enough to get into the affidavit to get probable cause to arrest her for second-degree murder. They're going to have more than this, obviously, but this is what they need, to show the probable cause. So, synopsis of the autopsy. On February 25th, George Torres Jr. Received an autopsy located at the medical examiner's office. During the autopsy, it was noted that George had injuries. George had long scratch nails to his mid-upper back, a large nail scratch to the back of his neck, contusions to his left shoulder, left skull, and forehead contusions considered blunt force trauma. So that's probably some of what the police officers saw when they arrived at the scene, my assumption. And a cut near his busted lip. Okay, and then, so that was interesting. So then we've got a follow-up interview with Sarah Boone. So this is where, if Sarah didn't have a lawyer when she was on the scene being interviewed that Monday, she sure as heck should have gotten a lawyer before she decided to voluntarily go to the police department, the sheriff's office, and have another interview. Not smart. Okay. So she has this follow-up, and so she herself on February 25th at approximately 1500, about 3 o'clock, she drives herself to the Orange County Sheriff's Office. And the same two detectives conducted an audio and video recorded interview with Sarah. Everybody, I think, has seen it at this point. The following is a synopsis of that recorded statement. I read verbatim to Sarah her constitutional Miranda warnings. Sarah agreed she understood what I just read to her. After informing Sarah about the injuries to George's body, she continued to deny any physical altercation occurred between the two of them. Sarah was shown the approximate 2-minute video that she recorded on her cell phone. Not even halfway through, Sarah no longer wished to watch the video. Sarah said she did not remember making the 2 videos. That's going to be interesting. Sarah said the video looked bad. Sarah denied intentionally leaving George in the suitcase. Sarah was asked why she intentionally went upstairs and waited for George to come upstairs and did not check on him or let him out prior to going upstairs, and Sarah replied, I do not know. Sarah contradicted, so here's where they're going to get to more of the probable cause. Sarah contradicted her original statement and began to blame the consumption of alcohol. Sarah was informed she was not free to leave and under arrest. Deputy Sheriff Lisa DeLone responded to Central Operations to transfer her to jail. And then, so here we go. This is the concluding statement, which is the probable cause determination, the probable cause finding that they're submitting. Based off Sarah's inconsistent statements on what occurred and the videos found on her iPhone, I believe probable cause exists to charge Sarah Boone with second-degree murder. George Torres Jr. is dead, and his death was caused by Sarah Boone's criminal act. Sarah zipped George in the suitcase to where he could not get out. George begged Sarah repeatedly, telling her he could not breathe, and Sarah left him in the suitcase, therefore proves the unlawful killing of George by Sarah's actions that were imminently dangerous and demonstrated a depraved mind without regard for George's life. And so that wording is important because that basically is tracking what is meant to be second degree or murder or common law murder, which we'll go over real briefly. So that's it. There's the affidavit. There's some more documents about, just some charging information, etc. But very interesting. Okay, so real briefly, as I mentioned, in Florida, you could, the charging document here is an information. In Florida, a prosecutor can charge someone with a crime by either filing an information or returning an indictment by a grand jury. Now, you can have an indictment by a grand jury for any crime, but not a misdemeanor, but a crime. But if it's a capital crime or something that's chargeable by death, it has to be brought by a grand jury. This is second degree murder. It's imprisonment for up to life in prison. It's not capital crime. It's not premeditated or first degree murder. It's second degree murder. So it doesn't have to be brought by an indictment by grand jury. And so therefore they brought an information. So that's what this is. It's fairly simple. Just basically says, it was filed on March 23rd, and they basically formally charging her with murder in the second degree. Now, under Florida law, let me pull up the crime here. This is first degree murder. So second degree murder here is the unlawful killing of a human being when perpetrated by any act. So here the act would be putting him in the suitcase and, more importantly, failing to unzip him from the suitcase when he is pleading for help that he can't breathe. So that act, imminently dangerous to another and evincing a depraved mind regardless of human life. So they're going to use this idea that she just taunted him and then went up to sleep is like a depraved heart. Although without any premeditated design to affect the death of a particular individual. So it wasn't premeditated. It wasn't a specific intent to murder him. It wasn't, she planned it. It was just kind of, it happened. That is murder in the second degree and constitute a felony of the first degree. So it is a first degree felony, but it's second degree murder, punishable by imprisonment for a term of years not exceeding life. So that's basically it. The last thing I'll note is intoxication. Intoxication, which is going to probably come up, obviously, generally can be potentially used as a defense. Actually, not even really a defense, is as to negate one of the specific elements of the crime of murder. Well, here we're talking about murder, but of a crime. And generally, this is used to go to your mental state. So if you're intoxicated, then you would allege that I don't meet that element of mental state of the crime, and therefore I should not be, the prosecution cannot meet its burden of proving all of the elements of the particular crime, here murder. But the thing is, and the distinction with intoxication generally goes on whether something is a crime is a specific intent crime. So it's the person is actually charged with is specifically intending to do that thing. So here that would be, the best example would be premeditated murder, first degree murder. The person she planned to murder that person. That is a specific intent crime. So in some states, you might be able to use voluntary intoxication as a defense to show that prosecution can't meet that element of the cause of action. General intent crimes is that you just generally knew what you were doing and that it was, could lead to the result. So it's it's not a specific intent crime. In most states that even allow a voluntary intoxication to be used, it would be for that specific intent crime, not general intent crimes. The thing with Florida, though, we can just take all that with a grain of salt, is because what's critical here is that in Florida, voluntary intoxication, so not someone just drugged you and you didn't know. Voluntary intoxication is not any type of defense or negating an element of a crime for any crime in Florida, period. So she's not going to be able to use voluntary intoxication to negate an element of murder, of common law murder or second degree murder. Now, there are some other defenses they're obviously going to bring, and that is going to be the topic of my next video, is I'm going to go over some potential defenses, and one specifically that they've already hinted that they might bring because they had filed a motion for a psychiatric forensic expert is the battered spouse syndrome defense or intimate partner violence defense. So that one I will definitely be covering. So in sum, thank you so much again for joining. If you could consider liking and subscribing on your way out, that would be wonderful. And if not, I hope to see you in my next video. Have a great day. Bye.